What's up, guys? Today we have an SPL Advanced game from a couple years ago between UD and London Beats. UD is one of the most important names in Advance of the past half-decade. With his creative sets and teams, he has repeatedly pushed the metagame forward and established himself as one of the most prolific tournament and ladder players. A perfect example would be his Steelix Gyarados team, which had a lot of success, and I made a video about it on the channel. It is linked in the description if you have yet to check it out. So London Beats, his opponent, was not really an advanced player. He was a very good current gen player. However, his SPL team, the Cryos, was struggling in advance, and they knew he was a solid all-around player, so they threw him in. And now you might be thinking, well, the advanced veteran against the guy who barely knows the tier, how is this going to be one of Pokemon's greatest battles? Well, this is really, really something, and I would not have chosen it if it was the one-sided domination that you would assume it would be. So a little more context. London Beats had played a couple advanced games already and was struggling, but had shown that he could play. He was definitely a threat. You would not count on an automatic win against him at all. Meanwhile, UD was having a banner year. He was one of the reasons the Tyrants were so good, because he would win just seemingly every week. And he racked up several impressive wins. And just as significantly, he was really helping push the metagame forward, because several of his games featured notable metagame advancements. I'm not going to get into them now. I will say that I almost featured his game against Undisputed. That was a big one. But if you are interested in his other games as well as this one, as explained by UD himself, as well as the teams he made and used, then I have good news for you, because he wrote this season retrospective of sorts, which I have also linked in the description. And I encourage you, if you have any interest in Advanced at all, especially if you want to get better, some of the information is going to be a little specific to the metagame of a couple of years ago, but it's nothing really drastic, and the information here is so valuable for anyone. Even if you're not specifically an Advanced enthusiast, I think you will really enjoy reading it. And if you are trying to get better in Advanced, then this has a bevy of fantastic information, so give it a whirl. Anyway, let's get into the game itself, finally. So, we see two Skarmory leads. Now, with Skarm, there are a couple question marks. The main thing is, will either Skarmory have an anti-Skarmory tool alongside it? And an anti-Skarmory tool in this case would be either Taunt, to shut the other Skarmory spiking attempts down, or Magneton, as Skarm Mag teams were, and still are, very powerful. So, if you have Taunt here, you're probably going to use it. And if you don't have Taunt, even if you have Magneton, then you are going to use Spikes. So, the reason Taunt is not a bad move, because you would think, oh, well, isn't taunting into Magneton horrible? Then you lose Skarmory for nothing. Or potentially lose Skarmory for nothing, depending on sets. So the answer is, even if you, like I said, even if you have Magneton in this Skarm-on-Skarm matchup, you still are going to want to spike up first, because you would prefer to have it go like this. Spikes, spikes, they spike again as you switch to Mag, and then, ideally that you give them, ideally you only have to deal with 2 layers, which are not that bad. 3 layers, not the worst. You can handle that, especially because your Skarmory is going to be home free and you are up 6-5. The main reason is that you really want that spike. Generally, with Skarm Mag teams, the pressure comes from spikes in conjunction with Sandstorm almost entirely until you can clean up at the end of the game. So while you still have a defensive core to fall back on, it is generally preferable, especially if you have a Magneton, to ensure that you are killing Skarm as much as possible. Then it is generally preferable to go for that spike on the first turn. So you have a spike when their next Pokemon comes in to revenge kill you, and because you want that spike pressure right from the beginning. You don't want to be falling behind and giving your opponent more room to play around you. and you want to have as much. I mean, it might not seem like a lot, but it really does go a long way, especially once that sand goes up and the damage starts sticking to non-rock, steel, and ground Pokemon. So I say that to say this. Both Skarmory are either going to spike or taunt. You are not going to see Magneton switches on the first turn at least. So we see spikes, and at this point, if there is a Magneton, it's very likely coming in here. If there's not a Magneton, then they're very likely both going to keep spiking, and that's just what we see. So spikes, and now UD goes for a Whirlwind as London Beats goes for the third spike, and the spikes aren't showing up for some reason. Let me refresh. Okay, there we go. So UD goes for a Whirlwind. I generally would say, all right, I want the third spike. I want to match the amount of spikes my opponent has. But I see what UD is going for here. He saw, look, that Skarmory was faster than me twice, so I don't want to get dragged around with 3 spikes up, guaranteed, on the third turn, so I'm going to try and find out more about what kind of team he's running. You know, Skarmory's really bulky, and there's almost surely not a Magneton, so I'm going to get that third layer almost definitely. And so that was actually a very heads-up move on UD's part. So, nice move. A lot of players would not have considered it, probably myself included. So, well done to him. So, Celebi comes in, so that is an invitation for another layer of spikes, because even a Calm Mind HP Fire is not going to kill Skarm. And, yeah, so London Beats goes for a Leech Seed, revealing himself to be a defensive Celebi of some sort. I mean, even a Calm Mind Leech Celebi is still defensive first and foremost. So it's going to be bulky, and probably going to have Recover as well. So that's some information. He's running a tanky team. He's going to say, you know what, I don't want to switch around with 3 layers of spikes and having to deal with Leech Seed. So, you know what, I'll take the Leech Seed on Skarm, especially because another Leech Seed is very possible. And instead I'll Whirlwind around, find out even more about his team. Generally, I think Celebi should try to conserve its Leech Seeds until later in the game, so you don't run out of PP too quick, especially against a bulky team with longevity. But it's a good move, especially with those 3 layers of spikes. Then you are very likely sticking it to something. So now Milotic comes in, and here is Milotic is the devil. Around this time is when the Toxic Refresh Milotic was starting to establish itself as a prime threat. And you don't really think of threat when you think of Milotic, but it was incredibly irritating. And this game is a perfect example, especially because, minor spoiler alert, it matches up against exactly the kind of team it's supposed to give a hard time to. So previously, then you would just Toxic Milotic and it would die eventually, or you would threaten it with Toxic and it would have to switch. And here it just stays in and muscles everything. So out-muscles everything, rather. So Skarmory can, toy with it one-on-one, not while leech-seeded, but here's the thing. Milotic heals because Recover has 32 PP in advance, especially if it's going to be getting passive support from Leech Seed. And, even when Sand goes up, it's going to be a pain. 1 Recover undoes all the passive damage, and Skarmory cannot take Infinite Surfs. So, the Toxic is there because Refresh Milotic was still enough of a novelty to where you would check for it, rather than Whirlwinding more. But now UD has a pretty good idea of what London Beats' team is going to be, defensive, which is fine. So, and now here comes Blissey, and here is where Refresh Milotic shows how much of a devil it is. Because with Toxic and Refresh, you are going to force out Blissey very easily, and nothing else really wants to switch into the Surf Toxic combination with Spikes up. It is a major pain. The way that you handle Refresh Milotic is, besides like exploding on it with an offensive team, but obviously UD is running something more defensive. Offensive Skarm Bliss was not really very popular at this point in the metagame, so you are running something defensive, and you would try to switch around it. And with 3 layers of spikes, that's really, really not easy. So here we see a prime example of Milotic being a threat. And you are not going to be able, this is not Heal Bell. You know, if something is using Heal Bell, you just Toxic it 8 times and it, you know, maybe you miss one, but it only has 8 Heal Bells. But Refresh, as you can see, has 32 PP. So, you know, you are going to have to expend the entirety of your Toxic PP on 2 Pokemon to burn through Refresh, and then you can Toxic with a 3rd. So not likely that's going to work out for you. So now Starmie comes in. So UD does appear to be running, forcing the Refresh and trying to take advantage of Milotic. That's the way to do it. So that was a good move from UD. The thing is that Milotic is so bulky and so resilient that, you know, even trying to, you know, you can force the Refresh, but whether you can really take advantage of that forced Refresh is another question. Like, Starmie is not the most threatening thing in the world to Milotic. I mean, the Rapid Spin, getting rid of the spikes, is really valuable. And if this was a bulky Recover Starmie, then yeah, you would spin and then sit on Milotic between Blissey and Starmie. That's one reason why in the current metagame, actually, Refresh Milotic as a way of soloing defensive teams has kind of fallen off, as defensive teams have adapted to using more Recover Starmies. But this battle took place on March 3rd, 2018, so defensive Starmie was not popular, was not considered very good. It hadn't really been explored the way it has been explored in, you know, this past year, 2020. And it's, it just wasn't very effective against the armada of Toxic Protect Max Special Defense Skarmories. So that's why it wasn't good. Whereas offensive, on the other hand, was a terror. And at this point, it's very clear to everyone watching who's at all familiar with UD in advance that he's running the most standard team, which he refers to as Beer Lover, because that was the name he used on the ladder in one of the most dominant ladder runs that's ever been seen in advance. And so it's, Gengar, Swampert, and T-Tar last. So while the team itself is fairly, is very cookie cutter, it is the standard team in advance, then UD's modifications to it that we will see quite soon are part of what make, and the fact he had so much success with it. I'm not saying that he invented it. He wouldn't say it either. It's just, his spin on the standard team. Anyway, I say all that to give some more context and also to say this is an offensive Starmie. It's not going to have Recover. It's going to be 3 attacks spin. Thunderbolt doesn't come close to 2KOing Milotic, and it's going to get the spikes off, but Skarm's very... basically, offensive Starmie's spinning is not meant to be long-term throughout a game. Maybe if you had Wish Blissey, but even then, and Wish Blissey was not popular at all now, or at this point. So, between, the Skarm and the Milotic, then the Starmie is going to bring UD some temporary reprieve from the spikes, which is definitely very much appreciated. However, the Skarm is going to get him back down in the long term. However, for now, you can't let Milotic run you over just yet. You got to give yourself some room, and that is what Starmie does, or at least threatens to do, because UD makes a great move and Thunderbolts. Now, that Crit Parrot is kind of, ridiculous, hacks-wise. However, Gengar was not staying in the subsequent turn because it would die to Hydro Pump. So UD made a great move because what's very likely alongside Skarmory? Gengar, of course, because it spin blocks and it adds actual offensive threat. Because, Skarm with its Whirlwind and Toxic are great, and Celebi with the Leech Seed, and Milotic with its Toxic alongside Spikes, yeah, that's great. But you need some offensive presence as well, and Gengar is so common for that reason. So... that was very telegraphed. He was, trying to hit the Milotic as well, see if you can make something happen there, and then... Because if Milotic takes the first T-Bolt, it's almost definitely going to recover the next turn, so you can get that guaranteed spin-off. So UD made the smart move, T-Bolting. If Gengar tries to spin block, it's in Hydro range, and then he can't, stay in the next turn because I'm going to blast something with Hydro, and then probably get the spin-off. So, very nice move on UD's end, not panicking from 3 spikes. Saying, if I'm going to make the best move either way and not try to, panic off, as some players would refer to it. So, now Gengar is, irrevocably ruined unless there's a surprise Heal Bell on Celebi, which is unlikely. It's really hard to fit Heal Bell on Celebi's move slot, which, it's a shame because it would be really useful, but it's, yeah, so you generally assume that it doesn't have it. Anyway, so... it's unlikely, unless London Beats has a Claydol, which would not be surprising given that Refresh Claydol was also rising to help combat Toxic Protect Skarm and Gengar combinations and was naturally paired with the Refresh Milotic, I mean, this was when the metagame was really getting ready to enter its full-on refresh spam stage. So a Claydol there would make a lot of sense because getting rid of spikes from Milotic makes it infinitely more unkillable. And it also provides a crucial rock resist, which you really want on these kinds of teams. So very possible out of a Claydol there. However, that also means that Starmie is a lot more threatening. So as it stands, Starmie is incredibly threatening here. So UD makes a great move and goes for Ice Beam just to prevent Celebi from coming in, and that has a lot of special defense. You know, being able to take 2 Ice Beam. I mean, if Sand was up, then it would not have been able to do that. But even still, being able to take 2 Ice Beams like that with lefties, with 3 layers of spikes, means that thing is loaded on special defense. So UD goes for Spin, which is a great move, clearing himself the hazards. And London Beats makes a great move as well because, well, something else will give that move a little more context. But, you know, if he's thinking, look, I can't just recover, play defensive, the Starmie is massively threatening, I need to damage it as much as possible. You know, now the Starmie is basically dead. It's going to struggle to switch into even Milotic Surf at this point. And it's not like it can switch into Skarm before the spikes go up either, because UD's team is naturally defensive, and Skarm spikes all over defensive Pokemon. They can't, I mean, offensive Pokemon struggle to hurt Skarm, much less defensive ones. So it's just going to be at full health, and Starmie will be low, and it'll get Toxic protected and worn down and KO'd. So that was a really great move from London Beats. I mean, I definitely agree with the Spin from UD. He had to, get rid of it, because otherwise he's just going to be in the same position later, but potentially worse, because he could potentially get KO'd by a Doug Trio, which is very likely alongside Celebi, Milotic, Gengar, and Skarm. Has tremendous synergy with all those Pokemon, and he potentially would have not have gotten them off at all. Now, at least he can potentially get something going while London Beats relays the spikes. While still having Starmie for later. So that was definitely the right move. And London Beats makes a really nice move with the HP Grass. Like if he Ice Beams, then he'll be at low health, and if he spins, then I get it for free. So now Starmie has to switch out, and London Beats goes for Recover, so great move there. And now Skarm's at half health, really trying to get every bit of leftovers recovery it can to try and ward off that Milotic, because it's going to be a pain. So UD's in a kind of an interesting place here, because you don't want to get Leech Seeded and Whirlwind in Skarm. At the same time, you don't want to, Toxic as Skarm comes in. I mean, Skarm coming in is not the end of the world, but it doing it so soon, right after Starmie took that hit, it doesn't completely nullify what Starmie did. But I mean, Celebi's back at full health, and Starmie's down low. So, I mean, that was a great move on London Beats' end. It's the Celebi there really, look at how much of a difference Sand makes. I mean, you could say without the crit para on Gengar, or without the crit really, because then it would have come in on a Hydro Pump. So there's something to be said for that. And so I don't want to repeat myself too much. But I think the Gengar can definitely still be a threat, because Skarmory is exclusively running Spikes, Whirlwind, Toxic, Protect, which means that it cannot touch Gengar. And Gengar can come in and threaten to Boom Blissey on the switch or something. So it's large. I mean, it's definitely a relevant piece of hacks, but nothing insurmountable for London Beats if he's playing well. And I mean, that HP Grass play, that was incredibly heads up. That was a really, really good play. A lot of Season Advance players might not have made it. They might have said, look, I'm just going to try and recover and stay alive. And if he recovered and stayed alive, then he would have given UD a free spin and basically continue to fall behind, while Starmie would have stayed at full health. But that HP Grass was really, really smart. So props to him for that. Of course, UD might not have also expected the HP Grass. You might think, look, there's a possibility of Doug Trio there, which increases the likelihood of Calm Mind Leech Celebi. Nothing super sound, but it's definitely feasible that it would not be HP Grass. I wouldn't say unlikely at all. HP Grass is very common on defensive Leech Celebi, but with all those factors, the likelihood of Recover, a seemingly inexperienced advanced player, and the possibility that it doesn't even have HP Grass, then I definitely agree with the Spin, especially with the aforementioned factors of not wanting to have Starmie come in later and potentially get KO'd without doing anything at all regarding the spikes. So anyway, London Beats is in a good place here. UD makes a great move and goes for Protect, saying, look, Toxic is basically useless against Skarm. Is useless against Skarm and basically doesn't do anything to Celebi. So I'm going to Protect just to get that little extra bit of health with Leech Seed. So really nice, nicely done there. And now he goes for the Toxic. So now Celebi's going to, very likely to switch out. So he can potentially go back to Starmie here on Skarm or on Gengar. And he said he goes to Blissey. So that's a nice move, not risking Starmie. And now the Para is definitely relevant because Blissey outspeeds the Gengar and is able to threaten it with Ice Beam KO before it gets boomed on potentially. Of course, if it wasn't paralyzed, then UD could potentially go to T-Tar and soak up the explosion and take it out. But we're not sure about that yet. Instead, he's just going to go right for the Ice Beam, and Milotic comes in. So Milotic is in, and he no longer has spikes, but Starmie's at 20%, and that's huge because Starmie is the only other Pokemon on UD's team that really wants to come into Milotic Surf. Something people forget about Milotic because it's a defensive water type without special attack investment. Its Surf naturally hits really hard. I mean, people are used to Suicune Surfs, which are coming off 206 special attack, and Milotic is 236. Its Surfs, they sting like even Zapdos, offensive variants. So now UD makes a good move, goes for Toxic. London Beats was a little over-eager there, trying to nail the Starmie on the switch. I guess you also have to be somewhat careful with your Toxic PP, because if you Toxic into Skarm, that sucks, and if you Surf into Skarm, that's amazing, and UD decided to make the safe move. I think UD knows Skarm is very valuable, so he doesn't want to risk that Surf, which for very little reward, when he can Toxic fairly freely with Blissey. So I think with that, then London Beats could have recovered or Toxicked. That is the problem with Milotic, that sometimes you have to be careful with your moves, because you are relying on outside damage sources. Now with the forced refresh, then UD comes in, gets 6% for free on Starmie. That's huge, and I don't think he's going to stay in because he's going to try and do that again. But London Beats makes a good move, goes right for the Surf rather than trying to 2-hit KO Starmie with that. He goes for the Toxic rather than trying to 2-hit KO with Surf. And now he can spam Surf because nothing else is going to want to come into it. So his best hope is to draw another refresh, which again he does have to do. And Natural Cure goes a long way, but Blissey's getting low on health. It's going to have to heal eventually. So he went to Skarm there rather than going to Starmie for more lefties. I recognize that the lefties on Skarm are definitely going to be big too, but I think at this point, given how much of a threat Starmie is, then he could have gone back to that, and gotten back to 32% and tried it again and again. But he's still in a really rough place is the thing. No matter what he does, it's just grasping for little incremental advantages that are still not going to amount to actually threatening the Milotic out. The most he's going to do is protect here maybe, or just Whirlwind. Instead he double switches. That was a great move on UD's end actually. Because let's go back to that turn and look at it. So let's say Skarm's in here, got it on the refresh. So you're thinking, look, I want to drain Surf PP. I want to force the Milotic out and make it take spikes later to get my Starmie in for free and get more lefties and eventually spam T-bolts on it. And waste some Recover PP. As you've noticed so far, Milotic's been in a lot, and it hasn't used Recover once. Sand isn't active yet either, and that's big. But while it also chips Milotic a little, it also makes it harder for Blissey and Starmie to switch around. As soon as Sand goes up, Starmie will not heal again. So now UD makes a great move. What are you thinking? Protect or Whirlwind here? And he makes a great move by going to Blissey, which gets Blissey more healing if London Beats switches, and if Milotic stays in Surfs, then he has burned a Surf PP. Look, Surf is a lot of PP. That's the thing. It has 21 right now, and it's going to be hard to get rid of all of it. But it's the little incremental things. It's going to be a long-term more of attrition, and every little thing is going to make a huge difference. So so good move here. Now Skarm comes in, gets those spikes down. That's hurting Starmie, and UD reveals Fire Blast on Blissey. This is one of the things that helps UD make this team, really his own. Because Fire Blast on Blissey is very much not standard. On the standard set, you would expect Toxic, Ice Beam, Seismic Toss, Soft Boiled. And not having Seismic Toss can definitely hurt against certain Calm Minders, mainly Suicune and Jirachi. Suicune because Sub can avoid Toxic, and Jirachi because it can heal off, or offensive Jirachi even because it can Calm Mind up, and then your Fire Blaster aren't hurting it anymore. But the benefits, the upsides of Fire Blast are huge. I mean, you take away Metagross coming in on you for free. In long-term games like this, then being able to weaken Skarmory is big. The thing is, Skarmory is always going to get opportunities to heal back up. But being able to chip it incrementally is huge. I mean, now let's say that Starmie versus Skarmory 1v1 we talked about earlier. Then now it's majorly different. If Skarm is starting out at it's going to be around 60, 70. When that situation would next arise. So, I mean, definitely still better for London Beats because he got those spikes down, and Starmie is on a timer, but. Great move again on UD's end. Skarmory's trying to protect away the Fire Blast PP and get health back at the same time. So UD's like, look, I can't let this Starmie just die as Skarm spikes up for free. It wouldn't have died even to 3 layers because it was at 26%. And Showdown rounds up what it shows, but it's very unlikely that it was going to be at lower than 25. Almost impossible, I think. So, if not outright impossible. So. That was a good move, protect. Now Starmie's coming in, and it's going to threaten the Skarmory. I mean, look at Special Defense Skarmory shrug that thing off, 50%. And instead of Toxic protecting, trying to stall the Starmie down, and because it's not healing, so that might have been the better move. Because, well, maybe, because then it would be back at 20, then Skarmory protects, and then it's going to be at, then it would be at what? 14, I think, after the next turn, after Lefties and Toxic. So, turn 2 of Toxic, as Skarmory goes back up to 20, or no, sorry, 22. Oh, 28, I'm sorry. No, 12, 16, 22, I was right the first time. Okay, so now that my math struggles are over, then, Toxic Protect, you could make a case for it, especially because it forces Starmie to switch out or die. I think that might have been the better move, really, for London Beats. Because then you get more health on Skarm, and you pretty much force Starmie down to an even more untenable position, because either it switches out immediately. I guess if it switches out immediately after eating the Toxic, then that's not as good. So yeah, Whirlwind was fine. I think it's mostly splitting hairs, and you potentially get the huge benefit with Whirlwind of dragging in Skarmory and. Having a huge opportunity for more spikes and more health back. Because, Skarm on Skarm, you're not doing anything to each other, so London Beats' Skarm would have free reign to do whatever it wanted. That would be really valuable. So, you know what? I've changed my mind. Whirlwind was definitely the better, safer move there, especially because it can't miss, unlike Toxic. So, good move, doing everything you can to scrape out the percentages in a game that's going to be as close as this one. And if you drag in T-Tar, then, you might die to it, but the sand is up, so... Milotic is really going to take over this game. Starmie will get one more switch in. So, and if London Beats has something faster than Starmie, like Dugtrio being the likeliest candidate, then it will be forced to die, and the spikes will stay up forever because Gengar can be sacrificed to make sure they don't get spun. So, we're winning 2? Skarm. Bam. So now more spikes. And now UD says, you know what, I'm not risking it. I'm not giving this thing more health. I'm not whirlwinding around. Gengar comes in. So, because if Starmie, comes in on the whirlwind now, then it goes down to 8%. And then it will get whirlwinded out before it has a chance to gain leftovers. So therefore, if London Beats whirlwinded again as Starmie came in, then Starmie was effectively dead. So, 2 layers is going to be irritating, especially if Sand gets kicked up by Whirlwind, but it means Starmie will have one more chance to wreak havoc, and by judging by London Beats' team, then, we know that his team is definitely not a fan of it, and yeah, so he will be very hard-pressed to prevent it from KOing something, at least. So, UD makes a great move, goes to Gengar, especially because Gengar is his other source of really throwing out damage. Because, Milotic, Celebi, Celebi's a decent check to Gengar. Natural Cure for Will-O-Wisp takes unboost. Look, if it took Ice Beam from Starmie like that, then it's going to take Ice Punch for even less. But at the same time, it's still not a great check with 3 layers up. So, there's Skarm protecting for every leftovers, every bit of leftovers it can grab. And now here comes Celebi, the only Pokemon that can really safely come in without, dying. So there's the Fire Punch from UD Scar, not risking Will-O-Wisp on a Psychic, and he's just going to get more health on his own Skarmory. So now he's trying to Whirlwind, figure out, look, what else is there? And he reveals a Jirachi. So before we get into the placement of Jirachi on London Beats' team, I want to specify that Fire Punch on UD's Gengar it's also relevant because most Gengar are going to have, bulky Will-O-Wisp Gengar especially, are going to have one of Taunt or Explosion, or else Blissey is just going to kind of, beat them always. And, you want Will-O-Wisp because otherwise you get walled by stuff you shouldn't be getting switched in. Like, even with Fire Punch and stuff like Jirachi and Metagross, or even Magneton, are going to be way too irritating. So you're generally wanting Will-O-Wisp just because it's such a difficult move to switch into. So then you have your two coverage moves. So Will-O-Wisp, Taunt or Explosion, and then the standard was Thunderbolt and Ice Punch for great coverage. But UD was running Fire Punch HP Grass, Giga Drain, not HP Grass, on his Gengar for coverage against annoying Swamperts, T-Tars, Pursuit T-Tar attempts, and Fire Grass was coverage that UD made use of a lot on several Pokemon this SPL. And really established itself almost as the new Bolt Beam. It's just amazing coverage in advance. So he was using a lot of Will-O-Wisp, Boom, Fire Punch, Giga Drain, Gengar, and that's especially relevant because Thunderbolt is fairly threatening to Milotic. But when his only real way of killing the Milotic at this point, if his last are Swampert and T-Tar, who cannot really break Milotic at all, because the T-Tar is not a Choice Bander, which is a fast Choice Bander, which is the only set that would even stand a chance. Then his only way of killing the Milotic, actually KOing it, is Explosion on Gengar. And that's really tough because you get that wrong once, and the game is probably just over on the spot. So what makes this Milotic even more annoying is that the Jirachi has Wish, so it doesn't have the spin support that Claydol would provide, but it is fortified by not just its own Recover, but also Celebi's Leech Seed and Jirachi's Wish. So it's staying alive. You are not outstalling this Milotic with UD's team. You have to dance around it. So, and that's, as we've seen already, that's going to be a very tough task. So the Jirachi that was very popular around this time was a spin on the Fear Jirachi. Whoops, sorry about that. Asta Jirachi was Wish, Protect, Body Slam, Fire Punch, and with especially defensive spread. And then Fear made a set that was physically defensive with Toxic over Body Slam to more permanently cripple things like Swampert and bulky Tyranitar. They're fairly interchangeable with the moves and the spreads, but the general idea is Wish, Protect, Fire Punch, status move. And it's incredibly irritating, especially with spikes up. So again, a theme. And it's really hard to kill. This thing has longevity out the wazoo. So if it's Body Slam, Fire Punch, then if Swampert comes in on a Body Slam, then it walls it forever. But you certainly don't want to get it Toxic, especially because at this point, Refresh Swampert had not really taken off, so UD was just running standard EQ, Ice Beam, Hydro, like everyone else. So he makes a great move there and goes for Whirlwind, and he's like, I can't risk that Swampert, and I want to get that Jirachi out of there. The Leech Seed is going such a long way, so it'll be such a great Pokemon. And here comes Gengar with 3 spikes down. Look, everything on London Beats' team is threatening him at this point. The Jirachi is threatening with the spikes, the Gengar is threatening. Just switching into that Fire Punch, it wouldn't have killed the Skarm, but it certainly would have been a pain because Blissey comes in and its Fire Blast is not going to break through a bulky Wish, Protect Jirachi. It's going to get sat on and forced out and more damage spread elsewhere. So it's not bad enough that the Milotic exists. It's the Jirachi now is a threat of its own. And now here comes Gengar, which is a pain. Threatening to boom on the Blissey. So London Beats makes a great move there going back to Skarm. So he gets more lefties, worst case. That's how good Skarmory is. And, best case he gets his 3rd layer. I don't think he's ready to sack Skarm just yet, but the thing is that now he can just either protect if he doesn't feel like going to if he doesn't feel like risking the Fire Blast, and if he doesn't really care about Blissey soft boiling, which he really shouldn't because Milotic's going to sit on it either way, then he can protect and guarantee himself even more leftovers. But that would be a little passive. So Milotic is generally the safer option. UD makes a great move here, goes to Starmie. So London Beats is like, look, I'm daring you to stand in Fire Blast because look at its HP. a third layer of spikes. Remember, we said earlier, 2 layers, Starmie can still come in once, but on the third layer, it would die. So he's got to get it in before that, and he's got to, whirlwinding with Scarm would definitely be dumb. At least if you're going to risk dying to Fire Blast, then get the third spike out of it and kill the Starmie. So UD makes the switch that he has to, and that's a great move. Barely gets in before that third layer, and he 1 second. Ruminate on this for a second. All right, sorry, I had to pick up the phone. Anyway, so Starmie's in, and hopefully you have now ruminated on this turn and are excited to see what happens next. So Starmie gets in before the third layer goes down, which is crucial. And now, Gengar can be sacrificed to spin block. Skarmory doesn't want to stay in. I mean, Skarmory is almost... It can protect for the extra leftovers, but it doesn't really seem crucial at this point. And instead he's just going to go to Gengar. UD goes for a spin, which is totally fine, because even now... I mean, look, London Beats can pull the back to Celebi trick here, is the thing. It's tough. Do you go for Hydro and then just risk... On the bright side, he has weakened Skarmory, so maybe he can take advantage of that with his Tyranitar, but I mean, he's still in a very rough place. I mean, does he want to sack the Gengar for potentially nothing? He goes for Ice Beam, and down goes the Starmie. I mean, he was afraid. So great move on London Beats' end, and he was trying to... I don't even know if Ice Beam is the move because... I guess, Ice Beam, the Gengar, is better than Rapid Spinning if you're predicting the Celebi, but he was definitely in a rough place. London Beats had shown that he was willing to, and he was capable of doing that, making that Celebi switch earlier. So instead, Starmie goes down and doesn't get rid of the spikes at all. So, London Beats valued the Gengar less once it got parried for sure. There's definitely some more context to be given for that. But now, UD will be able to threaten with Gengar, but again, it's still not really threatening yet. He's got a Will-O-Wisp on the switch or something, but nope, he can't because that's super risky, and Fire Punch is just not doing it, and that the double recover duo of Celebi and Milotic is really irritating. That's 64 recovers between them, and they can easily look to outstall UD at this point. So here comes Tyranitar, almost surely going to be Rock Slide, EQ, HP Bug, Focus Punch, which is threatening to everything, especially with Gengar parried. So... he goes for Focus Punch, not wanting to let Skarmory come in for free on HP Bug, and it is his best move against Milotic. Problem is, even with the 3 spikes up and the sand, then Milotic is going to outstall it. So, he's got to go crit fishing, maybe. It's definitely in range. It's a good move because if it does go for Surf and, kills T-Tar, then at this point... then it will be in range for Gengar to chase it out and KO it. And then maybe Gengar can pull something. Especially, it's still going to be tough, but, it's possible. But now he's just recovering, and he's going to recover out of crit range. So, at a certain point, even a Crit Focus Punch, Crit Focus Punch isn't going to do it. So now he's got to try and chase out the Milotic with his Gengar. And Will-O-Wisp misses, and that bites. Luckily, he gets, he doesn't eat a Surf for it. That would have really been awful. But he was trying to recover off the Thunderbolt to be as pristine shape as possible. I've messed up that phrasing, but not important. So, the difference of 7% against a bulky guard T-Bolt wasn't going to do anything. And I think, with spikes, you could argue that, yeah, possibly. So, fair enough. But now he's definitely going for the Surf. And now you see the specially defensive Gengar in action, not taking much from Surf. And that's another thing that UD helped popularize, specially defensive Gengar. And the thing is that it's still going to get 3 KO'd, so his window of opportunity is very low here. Now he can get out of 3 KO range thanks to Giga Drain on the Gengar, which does a whopping 26% to Milotic. So not very threatening. And the thing is that he has to refresh now. And now the jig is up. He knows it's not going to have T-Bolt. T-Bolt would have actually been very threatening. But now, he has to time that boom. The thing is, it's even worse. Without Starmie, then everything else is going to be slower. And, you can't explode on Milotic here and say, even if it switches out, then, spikes. Because Milotic will recover on literally everything else and just win on its own. So you have to kind of keep this cycle going. Now, Giga Drain does have the distinct advantage of keeping Gengar out of 3 KO range. So there's that. He goes for the burn again, forcing the refreshes. We're in another sort of situation. We're in that same sort of situation here. So he's going for that Giga Drain. We're in a similar position. Milotic's going to be at a little less it's going to be at, actually we're in the exact same position. Another problem is that Giga Drain has APP. Refresh, Will-O-Wisp misses, so that's rough. And now now UD's in a worse place than before. Or actually, it's pretty much, basically the same as when this encounter started. So he's got to keep going for the burns. London Beats doesn't want to risk it, not trying to risk the explosion if he doesn't have to. Because, the thing is that UD cannot explode on the turn that Milotic refreshes because it will have Marvel Scale, and that will make Gengar's explosion even weaker. So pretty much you have to, and on the turn after it refreshes, when it's at 62%, you want to explode there to take it out. But if London Beats switches on that end, which is very feasible given how easily Milotic recovers against so much of UD's team, then you are basically done. The game's over. So he's not in any rush to take that chance just yet. So, avoids the Psychic as Leech Seed is... the Gengars are not being dealt a good hand in this game, as that's a third Will-O-Wisp miss here. So, on the non-Leech Seed turn, then Blissey comes in. Is this still... Yes, play. Come on. Anyway, Blissey comes in, manages to get a soft boil off, and London Beats reveals his last to be Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl is very uncommon on teams without sand, but on some teams you can say, look, I want all these other Pokemon, they have great synergy together, and London Beats' other Pokes definitely do, and I'm going to rely on my opponent bringing sand for me, which is definitely, a fair strategy. I think most people were expecting Dugtrio there because when Jirachi is your rock resist, then you need insurance against DD Tar, because otherwise DD Tar is really threatening to London Beats' team. Arrow isn't quite as good against DD Tar because its Earthquake hits less hard, doesn't trap it, and it can't switch into a Rock Slide, but it still is a revenge killer of even Jolly DD Tar, so it's a good choice there. And unlike Dugtrio, it threatens to clean up really, really hard. So UD's in a really rough place here. He's got to go to a Swampert with 3 layers of spikes down. That's really not pleasant. Now, the good news is that London Beats is not eager to use Double Edge, because Double Edging into Skarm or Gengar, or, that's just not fun. Because Skarm can very feasibly, that's a common tactic with Skarm Pert teams. You use Skarm to scout the move, because if it's Rock Slide, you can pivot to Swampert after, and if it's anything else, you can't do that repeatedly. And the problem is with Arrow, of course, is that it does repeatedly you get those chances. Look, it's taking no damage from sand or spikes, so you have to break through London Beats' defensive core eventually. You can't just sit on this Arrow forever. So that's a problem. However, it's just not looking good. It's likely Milotic comes in here because Celebi risks Ice Beam more, and UD's looking for a freeze on that Milotic more so, because it's not about predicting the Milotic and EQing, because then it just recovers. You want that freeze. That's one of your few tools for getting through this thing. So now you're in a rough place there. Protect and Recover seems awful, but look at his options. Do you just go for another Ice Beam freeze or switch and potentially get surfed or toxic? Recover was very safe there, so you could say that you have to assume that London Beats is going to play safe, but it was so feasible that he just goes for the surf or the toxic, and it's a very tough move to justify either way, so I don't really blame UD for that one. Why is this this is quiet. This is not the mood we're going for. We're going for this one. For those who are wondering, then there's a playlist on my channel called Background Music, where all the stuff you hear in my videos can be found. It's a long playlist, so you might have to do some digging, but I promise it's in there. Anyway, so now he's got to go to Blissey again. He got some more health on Swampert. So, in that sense, I could say, you know what? No, I take it back. Protect was 100% the right move there because, it doesn't matter if you beat the Milotic if Arrow just rock slides you to death afterwards. And I mean, yeah, it's not going to be automatic because, T-Char's at full health and has rock slide, but it's you need every bit of percent you can grab. So definitely a good call. Now, Blissey comes in and is going to be forced to soft-boiled, and that is another free entry for Aerodactyl. Now, the good thing is that Blissey is at almost full health, so he can UD can go for a soft-boiled here to scout, and he does eat a double edge. So that was really crucial, because if Swampert ate the double edge there, that was game over. Rockslide was going to destroy him, and double edge is Arrow's strongest move against a neutral target. It outdamages stab, Rockslide, and HP flying. HP bug has been the standard for a couple of years, but if it is HP flying, then it's still, double edge is still stronger against a neutral target like Blissey or Suicune or Swampert. So that's why it's used, and it does do a ton. But yeah, he's still going to be good enough to switch into Milotic. I mean, look, double switching at this point with the 3 layers of spikes is devastating. I mean, if Blissey tries to come in on the Milotic and London Beats goes to Arrow there, that's really rough, because you're not going to be able to safely soft-boiled scout there, and that's why Arrow with spikes up is such an absolute menace. So London Beats can definitely, he's threatening to run away with this game. I mean, he's got all his pokes, they're in good, besides Gengar, they're in good enough condition, if not, good condition, and UD's on the back foot and struggling to do damage. I mean, at this point, he's, struggling to stay alive, and it's looking like London Beats is, threatening a very convincing win at this point. The Starmie thing was, the Starmie sequences were really, really key. And well done on London Beats' end. I mean, he's been playing this game really, really well. So the thing is, after that initial double edge lock, you're thinking, all right, is this thing going to try? Is he going to give me a completely free Gengar switch? And you would expect no, because look, it was one thing to switch into Gengar with 3 layers of spikes, when Celebi was at full health and there was no sand. But now Celebi's at 86%. And there's 3 layers of spikes and sand, so it doesn't get leftovers. So at this point, Gengar is really threatening. I mean, that Will-O-Wisp, nothing switches into it besides the paired Gengar, and if he just fire punches, then, a poke goes down regardless. So that is the really nice aspect of that scout on UD's end, that the double edge, the Arrow locking into double edge gives him the opportunity to be really threatening. This is UD's way out. This is how he threatens to come back. He goes to Gengar, and it's, Gengar, either London Beats sacks his own Gengar, or, something gets crippled. Something more important than Gengar gets crippled. UD would love that. Yeah, go to your Celebi, give me the free KO, or, threaten to KO. Especially because specially defensive Gengar can very likely take a Psychic, or almost surely take a Psychic plus Sand from bulky Celebi, even at, not perfect health. So UD assumed, look, there's no way he gives me that free switch with Gengar. It's too threatening with spikes down. So he's going to double switch to Milotic, which is very likely. I probably would have done that, because look, if Blissey stays into soft boils again, who cares? Milotic on Blissey is exactly what you want. And if Gengar comes in, then you have one of your pseudo Gengar checks in. So there you go. That was what UD was expecting. Instead, London Beats just goes for the double edge again, and UD goes for an Ice Beam, looking to... I really don't think he was trying to hit that Arrow. I think he was trying to freeze the Milotic on the switch. And, the more Ice Beams you get... If anyone who's ever played RBY knows, the more Ice Beams, the better. You have to give yourself as many opportunities to hit that target with Ice Beam. So it was not about hitting Arrow at all. It was about hitting Milotic on the switch. And now, that second double edge is crucial because, Blissey was not exactly... out healing the double edges with soft boiled. So now it's in a really rough position with the spikes down. However, I mean, now the good news is that Arrow is going to die to, the Gengar doesn't even have a super effective move on Arrow. So there's not that. I mean, Swampert can Ice Beam it without having to risk Hydro Pump, but that's, minor. The bigger thing is Arrow's health is really not important. It's going to get Toxic... I mean, maybe if it's getting Toxic Stalled by Skarmory later in the game, but as a whole, you definitely would have preferred to have kept Blissey healthy, because now it can't switch in on anything. If it comes in on spikes again, it's going to be at like 7%, and it's, going to die to Milotic Surf. So now it's basically death fodder. So the good news is for UD that he does get Gengar in for Double Edge again, and I can't fault London Beats for that, because before I think Milotic was probably the better move, but now, and props to him for staying in and forcing the issue against UD's Blissey. The more it gets worn down, the better. And I mean, if it ate Toxic, then that was one. If Arrow ate Toxic, that was fairly disastrous. I don't know, maybe UD should have gone for that. That's something to consider, really, because you force Refresh from Milotic switching in, and then that's your opportunity for Ice Beam. So that's one avenue he could have explored. And if Arrow stays in, then you cripple it, and it no longer threatens when you have Protect on Swampert and Skarmory. Threatens as much, so you get something out of that exchange. So Toxic might have been the move over Ice Beam. Just in case, in the event Arrow stayed in. So I'm going to stand by that one. If you are going to stay in that scenario, Toxic is better than Ice Beam, because you want the Ice Beam to try and freeze Milotic, but Toxic into Milotic and forcing the Refresh gives you that same Ice Beam opportunity while still crippling Arrow better than Ice Beam will. So, because, now look, Arrow is, not going to want to switch in again, but at the same time, it does not lose health just for staying in, and I think that would be more effective in helping play around it. Anyway, the thing is, now London Beats is still hard-pressed to switch into the Gengar. Very true. But now he's at least gotten something out of it. He's effectively killed the Blissey. So that is why I was so surprised he went for it to begin with. Because prior, if you let Gengar in before, then you are forced to, sack something, and you barely get anything out of it. And now, at least he's got the Blissey down. And in that case, I'm surprised that UD didn't go to Gengar, because, Gengar on Milotic is partially what you want. You want that burn into Giga Drain cycle. So, yeah, I think Gengar there was better. I think Milotic there might have been better for London Beats. But, both players made the moves they made. And, good on London Beats for forcing the issue. I wouldn't have expected it. I think I'm repeating myself, so let's move forward. So now London Beats his Gengar gets sacked. UD makes a good move. He knows, look, that Celebi's not coming into not coming in. It's not coming in on Will-O-Wisp or something. It's don't mess around. Don't let Gengar come in on Will-O-Wisp and then give Milotic a free switch on Fire Punch. Just Fire Punch, take the free KO. Very nicely done. So. Great move. It's 5-5. Still very much advantage London Beats. But, UD's in there. He's hanging in there. So, now he's going for the Fire Punch, thinking, look, it just takes one crit. And if he doesn't recover, look, now, bam, game-changing. Now, London Beats' refusal to recover bites him, because that was a great move. He's expecting, look, it's at 94%. Surely, at least Sand will finish it off. But no, he takes how much percent? Let's Fire Punch. And UD's thinking, look, he's either recovering or I live Psychic. If you don't get the crit and he recovers, yes, then you can go to Scar, maybe. Especially now that, Protect on Leech Seed, especially now that Gengar's no longer a factor. So that would actually be very nice. But it's recover, and on this turn, a Fire Punch crit will KO him. And if he Psychics, I stay in and 2 KO him, and suddenly Gengar's taken out 2 Pokemon, and now UD's really in it. So that was a great move, and Psychic does 81%, especially defensive Gengar is crazy. I mean, this thing is living T-Tar Crunch plus Sand, so yeah, it can take a Celebi Psychic. But, yeah, so that was a really great move on UD. Look, at this point, he's going for Ice Beam, freezes, crits, every little thing you can do to scrape out a win. You're recognizing when that little piece of hacks can put you over the edge, can be relevant enough to get you that KO, get you in the game. And now he's straight up to a KO. And I mean, London Beats was not, I think Recover was probably safer. I don't know, because it's not like he's threatening to, I don't know, I don't think Psychic was a great move there. I think that Recover was definitely safer, because Gengar is not threatening in the same way. Because, I mean, if Gengar, takes down Celebi with it, with Explosion or something, then, Milotic wins the game. Gengar dies to Celebi, and Milotic wins the game. So in that sense, then you... I mean, I guess it does boil down to the surprise of Spadef Gengar, because Psychic is a fine move if you are expecting Psychic to KO. I still think Recover was safer because, if Gengar does die to Psychic, then it's going to switch out. It cannot risk this. And then you recover off the Spike's damage, and you're better off than you were before. So therefore, next time Gengar comes in, you are able to check it even better than you were this time. You're out of range of that Fire Punch to a KO. As we saw, Sand making the huge difference there, alongside the little bit of chip Selby took. So... Recover there, I think, was a lot safer. Maybe he was expecting Taunt. No, feasible. But the safe factor of Psychic was the allure there. But Special Defensive Gengar, I mean, that's UD for you. I mean, this is an example of how he got ahead. He was a great player, of course. And when you combine great playing with these kinds of innovations, I was trying to find a better word but failed. Innoventions, for a 30 Rock reference. With these kinds of creative, forward-thinking innoventions, then you give yourself these kinds of advantages that you otherwise wouldn't have. And, it's hard to think up of these things. That's why you can't just say, hey, man, just be more creative and you'll be better. It's not as simple as that. Because, anyone can think of something creative, but something that's creative that actually gives you an edge, like in this exact scenario, that is a mark of a really, really great player. So very huge props to UD for that. And of course, for staying and going for the Fire Punch in the first place. He recognized that perfectly. You think, oh, you risk the Selby? Come on, you got to keep the Gengar alive for Milotic. He's like, no, I live the Psychic. I got to force it here. I got to force myself to get that crit. If he Psychics, I'm getting that to a KO. So really well done from UD there. And now London Beats has no choice but to, what is he going to do? Risk the arrow switch in? Selby dies anyway? Not worth it. So however, while that was crucial for UD to make progress and to open up the game, put himself really in the running to win it now, it's still not perfect because even Giga Drain's recovery is not going to get him out of range for Milotic Surf anymore. It's not healing that much. So he's got to time that explosion perfectly. So, he's not going to have to do it now. But actually, that makes it even worse, the fact he doesn't have to do it now, because Arrow's going to come in and chase him out, and now he's going to have to find another way to get in. Of course, his primary target is going to be Skarmory, because Skarmory can't actually touch the Gengar, but it's still going to, having to deal with whirlwinds and whatnot. So, now, granted, when Gengar comes in on Skarmory, the Will-O-Wisp is huge. Milotic doesn't want to switch into that and the Will-O-Wisp, and that would really be good for UD. However, it's managing to get himself into that position to begin with. So that's the battle here. So Arrow's coming. Oh, Jirachi's coming in. I guess that's not that surprising. No, it's not that surprising. Especially because he's toxic to cripple T-Tar and Swampert. So that's huge. Now, of course, you don't want to... Now, I know this is really easy for me to say, almost 3 years later. Like, look, you got to go for Toxic here. but I really do think that, because look, what's UD going to do? He's going to switch to T-Tar or Swampert. Almost surely T-Tar, because you don't want to risk that Swampert and, risk losing to Arrow. T-Tar is, fairly expendable because it, chases out Jirachi and, forces Milotic recover. So that's pretty much all you're doing. And if Milotic recovers, then, Blissey dies and Skarm has to do it. It doesn't really make a huge difference, especially because of Fire Punch's nice 20% burn rate. But at the same time, you really, toxicking the T-Tar really guarantees that you are putting yourself in a great, great spot. Now, of course, with Protect and Wish, you can probably just sit on it, in the one-on-one, because Jirachi's not really that crucial. Look at how big that double edge is now. Jirachi... Blissey would otherwise be able to at least soft build up and be able to be useful before T-Tar would come in and potentially force something else, force a different kind of play that UD could pivot around on. Skarm on Toxic, T-Tar on Fire Punch, hope for no burn, threaten the Jirachi out, Milotic comes in, Blissey comes in safely, but now without Blissey as an option, he can't perform that kind of sequence. So instead, he's kind of pigeonholed into this Skarm hole. Now, granted, Gengar is such a huge threat that I am surprised he went to Swampert because And look how good Toxic would have been against Swampert or T-Tar there. I know it's so easy for me to say, but look, if Gengar dies, the game is over. I mean, like, barring... I don't think he would have to like triple crit or something, or even it would be even more outrageous than that. Milotic just wins the game on the spot. And if you Toxic T-Tar or please still play, okay, if you Toxic T-Tar or Swampert on the Switch like that, it's not over, but it's certainly threatening to be. So that would be really, really huge. Now he gets to get some lefties on Pert. I am a little surprised that it wasn't T-Tar because Swampert is here to check Arrow by resisting Rock Slide, and T-Tar forces Milotic recover, and so I am a little surprised there. You could say it's arguably splitting hairs, but I don't know. So Earthquake, Milotic comes in, and now what's the answer? Skarmory, he's forced to go to Skarmory, and admittedly, what he can do if he wants to be cheeky is protect. First of all, definitely you got to do that. I mean, he's not stalling out those surfs at this point. It's just for the leftovers. And what you can do is Toxic to force a refresh. Very good. And then that brings Milotic 6% lower, 6.25% lower for later, for the boom, before you Whirlwind it. So, actually, it was at 92. What was I missing there? Oh, it's at 98% from recover. Okay, that's why. So yeah, good move there. Now Jirachi comes in, and I mean we're still in a tough position. Jirachi's showing its resilience even with 3 spikes. That's how big Protect and an immunity is to Sand. So UD can't switch around it anymore. He Whirlwinds, and Milotic comes back in, so that's horrible. The good news is that you can Whirlwind here. And either Milotic does not, Milotic will not kill you here. So either you eat the Surf, but you bring Milotic down to even lower health, and that, that's going to be your window. Or Milotic heals and you get more health back. Ideally you Whirlwind to Skarm as Milotic recovers. That's your perfect scenario here. Or, oh no, why Toxic? Oh no. I think that was missing the forest for the trees. I guess you don't love the idea of Arrow receiving the wish or Jirachi. Yeah, I suppose. But now you're in that same position you are earlier. I mean, I encourage some discussion here. I'm not saying I am seeing the correct, the correct option of, the correct option for every turn, because I might be missing something, but I think, I don't know. Jirachi is very clearly a pain, but the more you force Milotic to stay low, then, the more opportunity you have. And I don't think Toxic for Surf is a favorable trade for UD there. So, yeah, I don't know. Now, I mean, it is Toxic, so, question is, what do you go to? There's the Protect. I mean, oh, that took balls. That's immense. I mean, look, now that's enormous. I mean, look, to say, because look, Milotic surfs there on the Whirlwind, Skarm goes down, and then he's in an incredibly tough position. I mean, that turn was huge. That was enormous. Let's look at it again. Because look, so here we are, Surf, Toxic. So here's the thing. Milotic, refresh on Whirlwind is fine. You could even say, that totally cool. Jirachi comes in, Arrow comes in, and stuff is, threatening to fall apart. UD's probably going to have to sack Blissey before he can mount a response. Before he can mount a response that's walled by Milotic anyway. So, against Arrow, that is. So, you could say that, but at the same time, that was such a tough move to make. Because you could say, look, the Gengar's out of range, and then I can potentially win with Skarm, Jirachi, Arrow against these remaining guys, especially with Skarm landing a Toxic on T-Tar, and then Arrow cleaning. I don't know. It's tough if because Gengar comes out and just dies, because Gengar's not going to KO Milotic if it's Toxic. So in that case, I definitely see why he went for the Surf. Because look, you get Whirlwinded out on the refresh, fine either way, but the Surf really seals it in. Because let's say you KO the Skarmory, and yeah, you're a little lower health, but what's he gonna do? The only move he has that doesn't give you a free refresh and recover, I mean, a completely free refreshing recover is Gengar. And with Gengar, you just surf and kill it no matter what it does, because Explosion's not KOing you. Remember, Marvel scale. And if that does happen, then you win the game anyway with Milotic and your remaining guys. So I don't know. You would basically take out Milotic. You would take out Skarm and Gengar, and then Blissey's basically dead, and then Arrow, Jirachi, Skarm are definitely going to clean up. And for UD, because if Milotic refreshes there, the game is over. Whereas if Milotic refreshes, the game is over. Therefore, you would want to Whirlwind just to give yourself as much of an opportunity as possible, right? The Gengar versus Milotic thing still isn't good, but it's so dangerous. So you would want to say, look, I can't risk it. And for London Beats, you would say, well, why not just go for the refresh, and why not play it safe? I mean, look, he threatened to win the game on the spot. So I definitely see why he did it. And he threatened, look, if refresh gets pulled off there and he gets whirlwinded out, I guess he has a 66% chance of getting a great whirlwind, because both Jirachi and Arrow are threatening to KO the Skarmory and to KO, or they're going to get a KO on something almost surely. I mean, the best you could do at that point is T-Tar into Jirachi Fire Punch without a burn, and even then, you have a non-toxic Milotic to deal with it, just recover on it forever. And UD's constantly on the back foot. So you could say refresh was safer, but that was just an incredible call from UD, being able to get that. I really, that move really astounds me. Because, like he said, I mean, the Whirlwind to make sure you have a chance against the refresh Milotic with the Gengar somehow. I mean, I get it. It's a really tough call. But I guess what you could do with Gengar at that point is threaten the Giga Drain and then sack the Milotic and get more toxic damage on the Milo, and then maybe from there. But even then, the fact that Gengar will still die and then you have T-Tar and Swampert left essentially is astonishing. So again, I welcome more thoughts on this turn in particular, and any other turns that you guys thought were particularly significant. But that was astonishing, because now, refresh, either Milotic takes the Skarm down and is toxic and takes more damage, or it refreshes and Skarm Whirlwinds out, and that extra little bit of toxic damage could be the deal breaker when dealing with Gengar's Giga Drain and Will-O-Wisp combo. So Jirachi comes back in, and it is getting chipped. I mean, it's not immune to spikes. It's good at not immediately folding to them, but it throws a Wish Up, and here comes Milotic again. So now we have a similar situation to what we had before, which was the whole Surf and, Surf versus Whirlwind versus Toxic. I can't see him going through that Toxic conundrum again. I think he's got a Whirlwind because, again, if he Surfs, then, I mean, Skarm gets more health, which, who cares? And at least, because if Milotic Surfs there, then it's at 57, minus spikes, then that's really actually danger. So the Whirlwind was definitely the correct move there. I mean, he had to switch it up with Toxic earlier to try and get something going, and now he's got something going effectively, and he finally gets, luckily he gets the Skarm Whirlwind, which helps him a lot. I mean, Skarm or Arrow both were, acceptable, but Jirachi would have been pretty bad, but he was favored to not have it go to Jirachi, because it was only a 33%. So now he's got a lot of options. He can protect for more health, which he does. He's going to scrap for every bit of it. At this point, if I'm UD, I just double protect, see if I can get that extra bit of health. But he goes for Whirlwind, fair enough. And the Gengar comes in. I mean, he's looking for T-Tar or Swampert. I mean, even T-Tar, it's not a done deal, because Gengar can pivot in on the Toxic. Or you can just Focus Punch for free damage on an expected Whirlwind. So, it wouldn't have been, but this definitely makes things easier for UD. So now the Will-O-Wisp is death. Nothing wants to switch into this. I mean, Jirachi is basically dead if it comes in here. Milotic is not comfortable doing so, but he has no other choice because he doesn't want to give up the Skarm. And UD goes for a Giga Drain, and that was a great move, because now with a second Giga Drain, he actually can be out of Surf range. However, the problem is, if he Giga Drains again, he threatens, then Milotic recovers, then he's in a worse place than he is now, because he can only beat it via exploding. So at this point, it's explosion or no explosion. And, of course, if London beats it's such a rough place because if he explodes and London Beats switches out, then he still loses because, again, Milotic will recover from 25 on literally everything, and barring some insane crit luck with T-Tar, then it's over. So he's got to get it. I mean, it's so tough to switch out with Milotic in this position, but at the same time, it's so tough to just boom. And it's, I mean, you don't want to Giga Drain and play it safe, per se, because... and that was a great move on UD, going for the Giga Drain after the Protect from Skarm, because he knew that people habitually protect even when there's no lefties to be gained. And I guess there was also the opportunity of wasting a Giga Drain PP, which is small but still somewhat relevant. So he goes for the Giga Drain there. I mean, now he can Giga Drain again. The thing is, Giga Drain again doesn't really help much because Milotic will never surf. At this point, it's recovering if it stays in. And I don't know, it's really rough. Another option is, sack Jirachi, maybe try to go for an arrow cleanup. Or, honestly, even just sack the Skarmory and try to whirlwind as much damage around as possible. It's also very feasible to make it as easy for arrow as possible, but nothing concrete either way. So it really does come down to if he's going to boom here. And the thing is that London Beast doesn't even know if he has boom. Taunt is very feasible as well. But he goes for it, and he gets the Milotic. It's not over yet because Arrow is very much in the running, but now he gets 12% free on Skarm. And the Skarm, now without Gengar and Starmie, then London Beats' Skarm is also very threatening on its own because Gengar and Starmie are the two Pokemon that can really hurt it. I mean, the Blissey has Fire Blast, but it's at full health, and Blissey's more concerned with staying alive itself at this point because it will be able to soft wield if Skarm drags it in. So it'll finally be able to see action again. So now it's all about surviving the... these three are still, on London Beats' end, are still very capable of bringing out the win. And Blissey comes in, UD's thinking his lucky stars. Swampert doesn't get dragged in. And now here comes Arrow on the Force Soft Wield. Great move. No Ice Beam was never getting used there. Even Fire Blast was incredibly unlikely there. So great move, forcing the issue with Arrow. And now UD is going to go to Swampert on the... Oh, and he gets crit by Rock Slide. Yikes. Not over, but that was definitely rough because Swampert would definitely take two, especially with lefties, especially with Protect. So, good move on London Beats' end, not letting himself get double-edge scouted with Skarmory, because he doesn't really want to get whirlwinded around and have Jirachi, basically, or threaten to die for nothing, but that definitely helps. So, a good move from UD, too, going right to Swampert, because he was confident that Rock Slide was coming, and not risking the Blissey. Now, on the bright side, Tyranitar still immensely threatening here as he goes for the Focus Punch, which does the most damage. Similarly to how Arrow's Double Edge is the strongest move against a neutral target, then Tyranitar's Focus Punch is also its strongest move against neutral targets like Skarmory, so it outdamages Rock Slide by a mile. So London Beats does not want to, he says, look, the Wish Protect thing, it's at too low health for that to be pulled off at this point, so I'm going to sack that and I'm going to keep my Skarmory healthy instead. And now it's a matter of whirlwinding around UD's Blissey and T-Tar and then trying to isolate the game to a PP stall with Skarmory that London Beats will eventually win because he will have Arrow in reserve. So that's his goal right now, threatening the Toxics, threatening the... that's what he's going for, Toxic, to just in case T-Tar, just so T-Tar doesn't get a free Focus Punch off on it. If T-Tar is going to damage the Skarm, then it's going to have to eat a Focus Punch in order to do so. So that was definitely the right move. And now he's got the faster Skarmory, so he's going to whirlwind in. And he's got to drag in the T-Tar over and over and threaten it again. And if T-Tar switches out fearing the Toxic, then London Beats can potentially go for a whirlwind and drag it right back in, but that's also running the risk of getting Focus Punch for free, so you don't want that. So soft wielding again. On the bright side, UD's Skarm is coming back to full health, so in a vacuum it can still check the Arrow. But the problem is he has to be able to kill London Beats' Skarm, and that is really dangerous considering how much he has to watch out for the Toxic Protect combo. I mean, he's not stalling. He has 14 Toxics, London Beats' Skarm, so it's not like he can really do anything. to prevent that. So, yeah, now Blissey, the good news is that Blissey's health for UD is that Blissey's health is high enough to where it does not have to soft boiled, so it can threaten with Fire Blast. London Beats is not going to try and risk Arrow there. So Rock Slide is 14 PP. That's relevant to keep an eye on for sure. And now UD no longer has to. Well, now UD has Whirlwinds, which are fairly useless because they're just going to go. London Beats can switch around infinitely at this point. So Spikes, Whirlwind, switch. Good move. Great move by UD there. Now that was incredible. We're going to go back to that. So as we just established, London Beats can switch forever here, and he has no interest in attacking with Aerodactyl and getting Toxic and losing the game, because that would lose him the game or come very close to it. So UD switches to Blissey here and gets it in on the Skarm. So now he can heal up, or he can threaten Fire Blast again, because he does live another round of Spikes and Sand. So he's threatening it, and he gets the Fire Blast off, and that's huge. I mean, he does risk the Arrow coming in, but no, he goes for the Fire Blast. And what's huge about this is that now Skarmory is in range of T-Tar's Focus Punch. And T-Tar gets dragged in, no chance for, I mean, look, at this point, just being able to, not having the Skarm at full HP was enough. The first Fire Blast was enough to make it so that UD's T-Tar could dispatch of it with Focus Punch, because, Skarm would need, like, quadruple protects or something to get out of that one. And then, UD's Skarm would isolate the Arrow one-on-one and win the game. So, now he goes for the free Focus Punch. Skarm has no attacking moves. And that only really serves to give UD more lefty, so it's actually not the right move to make. He just had to go for Toxic there. I guess it's more feasible that you just lock, because at this point you just lock into Rock Slide and Prey, so it doesn't really make a difference. And I guess he would prefer to try and protect his way back to outside of Focus Punch range, which is unlikely, but. Yeah, better. He needs a flinch on the Arrow, on the T-Tar no matter what. So Toxic didn't make a difference. So I agree with that. So Rock Slide, flinch, 27%, and then the added chance of a Rock Slide miss from UD. So at this point it's still very much game over. Now UD does, because Skarm is going to beat it. Now UD does make a mistake here by going to Blissey first. What he should have done was gone to Skarm, protect, because look, remember earlier we mentioned it's PP. The PP isn't the issue necessarily. He could definitely try and stall it out. It's more a matter of being as safe as possible in the event that Toxic misses or Rock Slide flinches or Arrow does Arrow things. So what you do is you go to Skarm first, and then you protect, and then you Toxic. And what having Blissey still around does is it lets you switch out, and thanks to the advanced switch mechanics, it gives you another round of leftovers recovery, therefore giving you more security against the Arrow slides, as we will see. So he does burn another. It could have been worse. He does burn another crucial Rock Slide PP here. And if he lost the game because of it, he didn't guarantee it the other way, but he significantly improved his odds. But it's somewhat water under the bridge, because now he's going to be down to 10 Rock Slides. And of course, worst case, he can always double protect, because he's actually favored, because 50-50, and then also Rock Slide miss chance. So misses Rock Slide and Toxic hits. So now you just spam protect, even twice in a row. There's no reason to do anything else. So that's the game. He double protects, and now even like a crit flinch won't save him. So he fails on the last one, and yeah, so that's the game. That was monstrous. I won't repeat myself, but I think this video justified its immense length, so I'm all talked out now. So thank you for watching very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you took something from it. Again, check out UD's season retrospective in the description. He goes over this game. And yeah, it's just so there you go. I know it's not the dimensions aren't great, but there you go. Anyway, thanks for watching. I will catch you next time.